Okay, I think we are all working. Let's just double check this. I think so. Yep, all working. Wonderful. Okay, so
Good.
hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am here with Gavin O'Toole, freelance journalist. Gavin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. It's a pleasure to be able to chat to you. So I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while and really enjoyed your stuff. And I felt you would be a good person to have on the show and sort of talk through some of the stuff we're seeing in British politics at the minute. What I perceive to be at least a rising authoritarianism within the Conservative Party. So, and I'm sure we'll get into plenty of other things as well. But so yeah, just to start with, like, what is your sense of how like authoritarian as such the leadership or the top of the Conservative Party are? Because I see this allegation thrown around all the time, and I see it thrown around by people who throw around the word fascist in a way that is not really useful, I think. So I'm always like, okay, maybe they're authoritarians, maybe they're just wannabes. Like, I struggle to like get a sense of where they lie on that kind of spectrum. Like, what is your understanding of that, or your thoughts?
Okay. I come from I suppose, obviously, I'm older, and I come from a generation, that can look back at previous Tory incarnations. And I have to say, so I lived through the Thatcher years. People are obviously pointing out a growing authoritarianism, but it doesn't look very different from where I'm standing to what we were experiencing then. And so we're getting all the same mood music. For example, I know Priti Patel is a big fan of the death penalty. Well, the death penalty, just take that as a kind of emblematic Tory principle, that you murder someone who you think, and think being a very important word here, has murdered someone else. This has been around since the dawn of time. This is kind of one of their signature mantras. It's this kind of macho, tough, retribution against people who commit heinous crimes. And it hasn't come back. We're still in a position where there's absolutely no debate on returning the death penalty, even though it's a favourite Tory jingle. What else have we got? I mean, we've got lots of sort of anti-immigrant positions. We've got basically covert Islamophobia. But quite frankly, they've always been the case. In the 1970s, the debate about immigrants was very much kind of defined by Tory positions, and there are lots of slogans that probably emanated within the Tory party. If you look at your average Conservative councillor in any kind of suburban area of Britain, they're pretty vile. The opinions that they hold when you prop them up against the bar are really, frankly, quite vile. But they're not new, and so at the end of the day, I'll be honest with you. My feeling is that they are no more or less authoritarian in terms of their reflexes than any previous Conservative Party sort of manifestation, if that's the right word. But I think what we really need to do, to be honest, is not so much to talk about their kind of Tory reflexes and their knee-jerk reactions, which are always going to be very predictable. We need to look at what they're actually doing. So the kind of policies or the proposals that this particular government have. And if you do that, it is quite a different picture, because I think we're looking across the board at a raft of really quite extreme policies and proposals in a whole set of areas that do suggest that, yeah, we're actually experiencing an authoritarian moment.
So you're saying basically that they have always held the beliefs and desires and opinions that the current party basically does, but the issue here is that a lot of these sort of, maybe, I don't know, ideas that would not have been put forward or would have been not had the support for it, or I don't know, maybe they felt they couldn't get away with it in the past, that now we're seeing what they always would have done if they were able to get away with it, basically?
Yes, in a word. I mean, basically, they've got this thumping majority, even though they're under pressure tonight. In general, they're clearly not under pressure. They've got a thumping majority. They can do what they like. And so a lot of these policies, these ideas are just, reliving. They're specific policies, so they can't come from a previous era, but they're reliving the principles of philosophies of, their great heroine, Margaret Thatcher. And she was the turn to the right in post-war conservatism. She was basically the figure that wanted to end, what do they call it? One nation conservatism, and wanted to instill a new kind of neoliberal, right-wing, pro-Pinochet. Yeah. And fascism, I know it's an often misused term, but it is a form of fascism. It's kind of misuse of the authority of the state to impose really restrictive authoritarian policies. That is a form of fascism. So what they do is they're harking back to those principles, but they've got their own specific bunch of policies, to do with the current agenda. And if you don't mind, Josh, I want to run through what they're doing in various areers.
Yeah, please. Is that okay? I mean, I also have a list. So
go on. Well, you tell me your list.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is just this is from a piece that I wrote a couple of months ago. It was called "So You Think the Government are Fascists? Why Give Them More Power?" Because it's just because people were throwing around this term fascist, and like the thing that confuses me is that the people who will turn around and call them fascist will then like selectively be like, oh, it's authoritarian fascism, and then when they do things that are actually really, really terrifying, their silence, like their treatment of Julian Assange, like the journalists who are screaming about fascism don't care about like him being locked up for nothing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so here was a brief rundown that I had. So they've been found in contempt of Parliament. Numerous cabinet members have broken the law and the ministerial code and remained in their position. They refused to give Parliament the Brexit impact papers and rammed through numerous Brexit bills without adequate debate and scrutiny. They have allowed a shady group of neoliberal right-wing think tanks and lobby groups centred around Tufton Street to have outsized access to government ministers and influence policy, things like free ports that come straight out the Tufton Street playbook. They prorogued Parliament in order to stop debate. They lied to the Queen about it and then considered doing it again. They flouted their own COVID guidance rules. They used this crisis to hand out millions and millions and millions of pounds to their friends and donors. The list continues, but that's some of the things, at least anyway, that I made note of.
Yeah, and all of those things. So everything you've kind of identified there correctly, it has a sort of underlying theme, and the underlying theme is they have impunity. They will get away with twisting or distorting the normal rules of politics according to their needs, their corrupt needs in many cases, without any parliamentary sort of oversight or parliamentary intervention, or without the normal institutional checks and balances that you would associate perhaps with democracy in general, but I suppose you should associate with Britain, although I think, we're well past that in this country. Yeah. I mean, the way I'm going to go through my list now, if you don't mind. The way I broke this down was according to three areas where there's increasing evidence right now that those instincts that we regard as authoritarian, but were always there in the Conservative Party, are now being translated into policy because of that thumping majority, and also because of their, as you point out, their kind of corrupt disregard for normal checks and balances. So the first one is to do with institutions. So institutions are under attack. They're under authoritarian attack. They are attacking what we might regard as the institutions of a mature democracy. So a good example is the BBC. They have twisted and distorted BBC coverage in all kinds of ways. First of all, by leveraging in their own favoured journalists or relying on supportive journalists. I'm not going to name names because I'll get sued, but there are clearly a number of leading journalists who report for the BBC who are, doing the dirty work. So the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, he's the former Tory councillor. And the new chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, is a former Tory donor. They're all regarded as important characters, to the Conservatives. The guy they tried, obviously it didn't happen because he got fed up and walked away in a hissy fit, but they tried to shoehorn Dacre into the regulator. So they are basically, what they're trying to do is they're trying to, as all right-wingers do, they're trying to gag the media. They're trying to prevent liberal journalism within established national media institutions, which means the kind of thing you do and the role of smaller websites is absolutely critical, because if the BBC can't speak out, if they can't report with objectivity and impartiality, it falls to little people to do it, and that's why you need to build a following. So that's one institution. Other institutions they're having a go at. This is a good one. Also to do with freedom of speech. They're trying to, I don't know how they want to introduce legislation that allow people who universities want to prevent from speaking. So these far right, demagogues that come from all over the world, particularly America, they will have a right to speak. Universities will no longer, student unions will no longer be able to block them. So they basically, this could see far right nationalists, Holocaust deniers, for example, being able to speak by law, and if they're prevented, to sue universities. Okay, this is a very problematic issue, because honestly, universities shouldn't become forums for that kind of hate speech. The judiciary, they want to protect the judiciary. They say they want to protect the judiciary from being drawn into political matters. Basically, what that means is they want to prevent judicial review in cases that they disagree with. I mean, I have to say there are, for example, to do with Northern Ireland, examples of this, where there are, judicial decisions on Northern Ireland that the government doesn't like and therefore wants to be able to prevent. So that's one area. Institutions. There are institutions that we associate with checks and balances are under attack. Secondly, political process. The procedures by which we manage our democracy are under attack. Now, you yourself have referred in your list to many of those procedures. You've referred to the parliamentary procedures, the way they've lied, the way they prorogued, the way they've, tried to, distort the legislative process in a very anti-democratic way without proper scrutiny. I mean, more recent examples are the boundary changes that they're trying to bring in, which will simply and kind of quite blatantly, it's what's called filibustering. They're trying to redraw the boundaries so that it's much more in favour of the Conservative Party, and their proposals will simply build in a Conservative or Tory bias into the very act of voting. You'll be voting effectively with 1.5 votes for a Tory and 1 vote for Labour, or 1 vote for anyone else, or half a vote for anyone else, depending on the seat. Voter ID is another example of how they're trying to twist the political process. They want to roll out this. Everyone in the world says this is not necessary. Everyone in the world, all the experts say this will actually prevent minorities, little people. Oh, am I ranting? Sorry, am I?
No. I just wanted to pause there actually, because I hear this discussion about voter ID made all the time, and it's like, to me, it's the biggest non-issue on the planet. It's the biggest distraction. People throw around this culture war idea, and it's just the literal perfect policy. In Northern Ireland, we get sent a voter card with our before the elections, and that is acceptable to take with you to the polls. It would be really super duper 100,000,000% easy to supply everyone with a card to say this is who I am, and send it to everyone who is registered to vote. And I have zero conception as to why people get dragged into this argument about whether or not voter ID is racist, when you could just provide everyone with ID. It would solve it would shut the Conservatives up completely, and it would probably end up encouraging more people to vote because it was very easy for them to get an ID then alongside it. I don't, yeah. Continue with your thing, but I just wanted to say that I think it's an issue that just gets brought up by the Tories, especially, in order to just I know, stir up hate and distract people.
Well, I think they have a purpose, and I think that the whole point is to disenfranchise certain groups. Because if you have to have an ID, then obviously, if you can't get it in time, you're not going to be able to vote. And the people least likely to get the ID, in time to have a passport or a driving license are going to be the poor people. They're going to be people of color, people in working class estates who've never been abroad. My grandmother never went abroad in her life. It's very possible that people don't have a passport. Yeah. Why would you need a passport if you're not going to go to France into your middle class chateau, to drink all that wine that they've got lots of, which they can't sell in Britain anymore? I mean, it is voter suppression. That's what this is. So although in some ways, it's not a prominent issue, it's a really good example of how they create a kind of moral panic about voter impersonation, about fraud, when actually there is none. And in fact, the joke is, let me tell you, I've studied Mexico a lot, and Mexico was notorious for voter fraud. And they had level upon level, layer upon layer of voter ID, voter registration, voter rules, blah, 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 blah. And actually, they completely failed to prevent fraud. So voter ID actually doesn't
rig some of the machines in.
They rig the machines. Yeah. They rig the cards. They rig the. Even the voter impersonation is possible under a sophisticated fraud. So it's very spurious, the Conservative argument, and they're doing it for a reason. The reason is like filibustering to rig. Is that no gerrymandering? What am I talking about? Gerrymandering, not filibustering. Gerrymandering to rig the political process. So that's just another example. Shall I? I've got one more on my little list of three.
Please.
Right. The third area of authoritarian manifestation under this, and we'll all be familiar with this, and this is the Priti Patel territory, policing and justice. Basically, this kind of macho, strutting Tory speak about the death penalty, about sending these very frightening signals about how tough they're going to be with anyone who does anything. I mean, there are two bills in particular that are very, very worrying. So obviously, everyone's talked a lot about the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which will basically is the biggest threat to our right to protest in a generation. It will criminalize protesters who are annoying, and that means noisy. That means you can't protest, because you can't protest and not be noisy. And at the same time, it will actually have a massive effect upon a community that matters a lot to me, the traveller Roma community. It seems like Priti Patel has actually, written this bill with that community in mind, because so many Tory councillors in places like, Norfolk are so unhappy about people in caravans with, children with snot under their noses, running around and sort of wild dogs. So that's one of the areas, but is a clear attempt to suppress freedom of speech and to change ways of life that don't conform with that kind of, what would you call it, Middle England conservative lifestyle of kind of, manicuring your garden and washing your car every fucking weekend. Right. The second bill, which is probably a little bit more disturbing, but it's completely under the radar because most people would not be interested, is called the Covert Human Intelligence. Oh, sorry, it's not a bill, it's now an act. The Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Act. And this actually allows state spooks, agents of MI5, agents of MI6, all these secret agents, but James Bond wannabes, to break the law. They are allowed to break the law in the service of their country. So like, what's his name? That actor, Craig, what's his face, with big muscles. They're allowed to go around beating people up, probably torturing them, certainly shooting them if it's, in the national interest. And also, actually, there's a little hidden corner of this bill is that they will be able to use children to spy on their parents. And this specifically
hang on a second. Hold up. What do you mean they can use children to spy on their parents? Children can be recruited as informants by the security services by law if they have information under that's incriminating about their terrorist, presumably Muslim parents. Yes, fact. Yes. So that's a little bit 1984, isn't it?
Oh, a little bit. I mean, come on. This is just ridiculous. We're really now, Josh, into the realms of loony right-wing Tory outlanders who live in, some unpronounceable village in the middle of Norfolk. But those are two bills and acts. These are actually legislation that's underway. That there are lots of other examples of this creeping authoritarianism. I mean, Priti Patel's, they were in the paper today. Priti Patel's rules on immigrants are quite frankly hideous. They're quite frankly racist.
Yeah, they want to strip the citizenship of, or have the ability to strip the citizenship of, I think, like 6 million people. Am I right there?
That's right. That's right. And then deport them. I mean, this is, what are we talking about here? What does that remind you of?
Yeah. And I hate to go there. But because I don't like invoking that, because it just
no, of course,
because there's
that's
plenty, there's many examples in which you can talk about segregated societies without invoking that. But obviously that's the one that always springs to mind, because I don't know what it was like when you were at school, but when I was at school, I did 7 years of history in grammar school. And because we still have grammar schools here, we did at least anyway, and I think 6 of the 7 we studied the Nazis. So it's the big one that we all study, and I think that's probably why it gets invoked most often. But this is right, because this is what concerns me, is that we're watching all of these moves go through, and there's like, what's happened to the opposition? They're toothless.
Well, no, I think this is a really important point. The point you're making is absolutely critically important, because in a way, in a proper functioning democracy, none of this would be of much concern if you felt that you could use the system, use the existing institutions and procedures to kind of mount a spirited defense against this kind of creeping. The trouble is, it's happening in the context of what, to my mind at least, is a very limited democracy already. People never think about this, but Britain is actually a very restricted democracy. A good example of that, for example, and Tories absolutely hate it when you bring this up, is our voting system, first past the post. Now, that's a good example because Priti Patel is actually trying to roll back proportional representation or some form of proportional voting in local elections in this country, certainly in the mayoralty of London, that is, we made some progress in getting. They want to roll back to first past the post. First past the post is the least democratic form of democracy imaginable. It's a kind of an anachronism in this day and age. Nowhere in the world, apart from the Anglosphere, uses it anymore. They don't use it in Scotland anymore, but because they don't use it, but clearly don't use it in Northern Ireland because it's not representative. It's a way for a single party to keep its grubby fingernails, hold of power on power by paying lip service to democracy. To my mind, it's not democracy. In this day and age, that's not democracy. But that again is another, Tory narrative. So the other thing I'd say. So we're doing these authoritarian sort of traits are developing in a context of a procedurally limited democracy anyway. But at the same time, there's a lot of evidence, if you look at the polls, of a real decline in faith in democracy. Now, whether that's because of what the Conservatives are up to or was happening anyway would be a matter for academic study. But there are lots of statistics to suggest that British people are now growing a little bit disillusioned with them. This is very, very worrying.
Is that because that just doesn't work for us anymore? And is that because it's not democracy in the sense that we've been led to understand what it should mean? I mean, because this is my contention as well with the idea that capitalism is the problem in our society. This is no. We've allowed all our institutions to become horrendously corrupted. That's the problem for me. And that to me seems to be the problem with people's faith in democracy, is that they can visibly see it's not working for them. And I mean, it's not, I don't have the exact sort of data for Britain, but I remember seeing this horrible chart. It was like polling done by Pew Research over like 40 years in America, and they were trying to like correlate like a policy's popularity with its likelihood to be implemented. And there was none. There was no correlation whatsoever. It didn't matter how popular or unpopular something was. It had no bearing on that policy passing in Congress. And the only thing that had the influence that they could identify was big money pushing whatever policies that they felt, whichever direction or whichever industry it happened to be affecting. And I think we're seeing the same thing here. Like the policies that people are putting together, at least for this current like government, or at least you could probably argue for, I mean, I would argue for 40 years that there's been very few people in Parliament who are interested in making the lives of the people of Britain sort of more broadly like better. And that's, I think, where people's like loss of faith in democracy is coming from. Like, I don't know, what do you make of that assessment?
No, you've nailed it. First of all, there's lots of questions there. The first question is kind of a philosophical question. What is the purpose of democracy? Why do people want to vote? Well, they don't want to vote because it's a nice little trip out to the polling station on a Sunday morning, and they can take the dog. They want to vote because they want to improve their lives. They want to vote for a reason. They want better lives. Voting is a means of improving their lives and the lives of others, right? And then you mentioned earlier capitalism. This is intrinsically, fundamentally, and historically associated with capitalism. The reason for that is, when I have to bang on about Marx here, and I'm very sorry, but when right. Karl Marx actually never used the word socialism. This is one of the biggest myths in history. He didn't refer to himself as a socialist. The only word he used that would possibly have currency today is communism. But even then, he didn't use it very often. And communism, to him, related to the government by a specific kind of movement or party. But if you look at the history of socialist thought, what socialism really was, certainly in this country, was actually the struggle for democracy. So if you look at the early democratic movements, the Chartists in this country, that's the beginning of British socialism, were actually really, their origins were in extending the franchise, winning democracy for ordinary working people. Okay, and that superimposed upon that was subsequent narratives and ideological debates, which turned that into a form of socialism. But to my mind, they're absolutely the same thing. When you talk about socialism, what you're actually talking about is democracy. You're talking about extending the ability of ordinary working people to improve their lives by having a say on the way our money and our institutions and our common patrimony is used. That is what, to my mind, socialism is. It's actually got nothing to do with Soviet Russia and what's it, Joseph Stalin and the Second World War. It's about extending democracy. So to my mind, it is fundamentally related to capitalism. And if people are losing faith in democracy, it's because their democracy is not delivering what democracy is meant to deliver, which is real change and improvement in their lives. So yes, they will turn to whoever's there to who might make a difference. Of course, it's rational to do that. But what we're actually talking about here is a collapse of faith, as you say, in institutions, in processes, in democracy itself.
Yeah, and then to build on then what's going on at the minute, and this is where I'm really confused about the response from the Labour Party. Was the votes that are going on today about the COVID certification program, and for me it falls into several categories. This debate is like, is it going to help reduce the spread of COVID? And that's like another issue. But for me, the thing that I think we're all like not focusing on is like just how this system could be abused by a government who has shown themselves to have no depths to which they will not stoop, basically. And I'm concerned that it's a bad precedent to set for a government to have control over a system that will grant access to people from a centralized place that they set the criteria. And I'm aware that that's not where it's at now, where it's simply to do with COVID. But like my worry is like when we put this in place and we allow a centralized authority to set the terms by which you can set and change the terms by which you're allowed to enter society. And then you look at like what they're talking about doing with the policing bill and criminalizing protest. Like, I don't think it's a far reach to suggest that unwanted behavior would be a reason that this government could foreseeably want to use to say, well, you know, let's turn off their cert. And that's why I'm like immensely opposed to it. And I guess I wanted to like get your take on whether you thought that was like something I should actually be concerned about, and why maybe we haven't seen that actually talked about from the Labour Party, because it seems like something you could really hammer the Tories on.
Okay, I mean, I think we have to be honest about the Labour Party's policy towards COVID. It has kind of hummed and hard. It's been very unclear, and it hasn't been coherent from the very beginning. And frankly, I don't think that is very different to the Labour Party policy so far on a lot of things. Do I agree with you on COVID? The kind of, what would you call it? I think where you're coming from is you're suggesting that the COVID pass debate is an example of a kind of growing COVID authoritarianism. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially, like my concern is that it's now being like that this like emergency, which was like quite clearly an emergency last year, and for like I can't sit here and pretend like I would have known what to do. Like there was a lot of people commenting over the last 18 months who were like, well, if I was in charge, it would all be fine. I'm always just like, you know, this is to sit there and, you know, like actually have those decisions on your shoulders is difficult. Like, I don't know what I would have done. But now I think we're at a point where, like, awesome, the vaccines and the boosters seem to be working. We got like new drugs being approved in different parts of the world and trialed. And I think that they're now attempting to use this to distract from their just the sheer level of corruption, and to roll in a whole bunch of things that we really need to talk about, like the policing bill and the online harms bill and things like that. You know, I just that's just my perspective on it. Like I don't know what the right answer is, but
I think that's the answer. I think, you see, I probably disagree with you when it comes to the COVID passes. I'm less vexed, less exercised by the idea that you have to prove whether you've frankly, to my mind, it's a distraction. But that's the point you're making. Maybe this is all a big distraction. Maybe this is really convenient, given the problems this government is facing, to kind of try and reorient the turret back to something that we all understand and is very obvious and in our face. And I'd probably agree with that. Yes, I think you're right. I think it's actually, they've done this before. They have a track record of using serious and problematic public issues to their own political advantage. They're almost certainly trying to do that. Will they get away with it? Probably. They'll get away with it because they have the press in their pocket. The Labour Party is frankly nowhere to be found. But as an issue, personally, I have to say, I'm just not that fussed about the whole showing whether you've got a vaccination thing. I'll tell you why, because I went to visit my daughter. My daughter lives in Berlin about a month and a half ago. And we had to show our COVID pass. We had to show it to go to the pub, for example. And then they just took a note of it. In you go. Frankly, I wasn't that bothered about it. Although they clearly haven't got this right in Germany, because it's, you know, it hasn't worked. I think maybe that's a more important question, Josh, at the end of the day. Will it work? And it probably not.
Yeah, I mean, there was that debate was happening in the Northern Ireland Assembly last night about it. And yeah, again, for me, it's the question is, will it work? And why are they doing it? About 2 weeks ago, do you remember what the media was talking about? We were talking like literally day and night about the second jobs. And I was like, thank you. We are finally addressing this horrendous problem. And then, like, Boris Johnson gets a whiff of this new variant and decides, hey, let's go hell for leather with it. Even though the people who discovered it are saying, you know, we don't need to, like, go crazy. I know, like, obviously, caution, awesome, give people their boosters, yeah. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying that, like, it's not an issue, and this is where it becomes difficult to talk about. Is like, as I'm not saying that there's not, like, reasons to be concerned, or, you know, that people might not get ill, or any of these things. Is that I think he's using it as a dead cat, basically, to, like, throw that you know, that's the Linton Crosby saying, you know, throw a dead cat on the table, and no one else will talk about anything else. So that's just, I mean, again, this just my take on what's happening.
I think you're probably absolutely right on that. They will all try and do this. I mean, if our job is anything, it's to try and separate what they're intending to do from what will actually happen. And will they get away with it? I don't think they will get away with it. Not this time, because no one believes what they do at all anymore. The legitimacy of this government, certainly in terms of the spoken word, has collapsed. There's absolutely no doubt about it. No one believes a single word that comes out of Boris's mouth. And that is actually very problematic in a situation like this, because, you know, you can't, if you can't trust the bloody government, who are you going to trust? And that's really, and the scientists have said this. They've said this is a huge problem in terms of the way we move forward. But it's not going to stop them trying it, is it? They're desperate. They're kind of, you know, they have a saying, for example, in Mexico, the last kick of the drowning man. What we're witnessing is the last kick of a drowning man. He's drowning. I'm going to stick my neck out a bit, but my prediction is that Boris won't be with us in 3 months' time. Maybe by St. Patrick's Day. That would be great, wouldn't it?
Good reason to drink. Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, you see, right? This is another thing I wanted to speak to you about. So this draws us nicely in here. Is that who comes next? Because, like, I don't know what the British public will be thinking about this. I don't know. Maybe we're fine with a new prime minister every 18 months. But it seems like so we had David Cameron, then they knifed him in the back and they forced an election with Theresa May. Then they knifed her in the back and forced an election with Boris Johnson. Now they're going to knife him in the back, and, like, I don't know how many times they can, I don't know, remove the leader that the public have democratically approved within a year or two, and then continue to have support. And who do you think comes next? Because, like, the candidates are not looking like ones that maybe just because it's Boris, I don't see him as anywhere near as dangerous as some of the other ones. And maybe that's me perceiving it poorly. But, like, yeah, who do you think comes next?
Okay, that's a really interesting question, because what is the role in British politics of the prime minister or the leader of a party that's going to form a government? The main role, believe it or not, I think personally, is not policies. It's not even personality. It's recognition value, because you've got to accept that most people actually, sadly, know nothing about politics. They will vote for faces, recognition value, a few flecks of their understanding about someone's personality. And that is definitely not to deride ordinary people. Why should ordinary people know in detail all about someone's policies or their personality or their whatever it may be? Now, so that brings us on to Boris. Why did they select Boris? Well, it was very obvious why they selected Boris. They didn't select Boris because of integrity. They didn't select Boris because he was a particularly attractive human being. They selected Boris because everyone knew who Boris was. Boris was an election winner. And of course, he proved that. Okay, so you then apply that logic to who's going to take over after Boris. Who's going to win? But the Tories are very, very cynical. They're incredibly cynical. They will choose someone. The reason they voted Boris was to get them into power and get them all to win their seats in the middle of Norfolk, right? The reason they will choose the reason they'll get rid of him is because he won't do that, not next time round. So they need someone else who will do that. So they will choose someone who will win them an election. Now, who's it going to be? Right. Well, who are the candidates? Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Michael Gove, an outrider, Jeremy Hunt from before, Sajid Javid, okay, Dominic Raab. That's it, really. I can't see anyone else. Who of those is going to secure that recognition value without necessarily, getting across the vile nature of conservative policies? Now, your guess is as good as mine. Let's go through them. Rishi Sunak, well, he's the front runner. Yeah, he's the front runner.
Maybe it's good. I don't know if that flies.
Why doesn't it fly, Josh? Tell me why.
Because he's he's a multi-millionaire married to the daughter of a billionaire, and I don't know. I see him getting hammered for that. That's just my feeling. But I mean, maybe not.
No, I agree. I think he apparently he's the front runner for the bookies, right?
Also, close your eyes next time he's speaking, and you will hear Tony Blair.
yeah. Well, he's very slick, isn't he? He's clearly modelled himself on Blair, and he wears suits very well, and he's not got a fat belly like Boris. But the point is, multi-billionaire chancellors don't generally do very well as prime ministers. I mean, look at Gordon Brown. They don't translate very well. People don't like chancellors very much because they're tight-fisted and they put up taxes or whatever. So I doubt it, but he'll certainly be in the running when the time comes. Then we move to Liz Truss, apparently, who's just behind Rishi in the betting, at the Paddy Power. Now, she's an interesting character. She's very, very right-wing, okay? She would really be the favourite of the Tory right. She models herself on Thatcher. She even wears Thatcher clothes, okay? So she's got the Thatcher school of fashion.
Did you see her in the tank?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, look at that. Look at that. I mean, it's this kind of macho, stick your breasts out moment, isn't it? For, some woman politician who wants to be prime minister. But I don't know. I mean, people don't really know who she is. She's still got a bit of a recognition problem, I would say.
She's also an idiot.
Yeah. But that's not why people will vote for her. You see, this is what I'm saying. I'm sorry to say that. And it really isn't to deride or demean ordinary voters, but what they'll be voting for is this recognition value. Who is she? What does she stand for? Is she a good girl? Like Boris was a good guy. He's a laugh, that man, whatever. That's how they'll vote. It's not how you and I would vote, but that, I'm afraid, is how most people will vote. When we are not to deride that, because that's how ordinary people vote. Ordinary being, a terribly derisive term. I apologize for using it, but that's how the average voter votes, the man or the woman on the Clapham omnibus. And I don't think she's got the recognition value. I think she just hasn't been around at that senior level enough for people to know her. So then we come to the third character. To my mind, my money's on Michael Gove. Not because I like the guy. I hate the guy. I think he's a hideous Machiavellian, I don't know, what would you call it? Monster. But he's got the recognition value and he's really fecking clever, okay? This man has been scheming since the last Tory election to become prime minister, okay? He's got friends in high places. He keeps quiet when necessary. So have you noticed? Have you heard anything recently from Michael Gove?
Not.
That's a sign. That's a clear sign that Michael Gove is plotting, okay?
Do you think Dominic Cummings is speaking to him?
Probably. I think he employed Dominic Cummings in the first place. They're big pals.
He worked at he was his attack dog at the education department.
Yeah. And that speaks volumes because he's almost certainly talking to him, and he's probably, Dominic Cummings thinks, how am I going to get back? Through Michael. But also there's a very important reason why Michael Gove's the front runner, or should be the front runner. He's Murdoch's man. So Michael Gove, who a former writer of the Times, he's Murdoch's favourite candidate. Murdoch loves him. Don't you remember that famous interview? When was it? It was an interview with Gove about the last leadership election, I think, in some office somewhere. And in the background, it turned out there was sitting Rupert Murdoch. So, I think that alone is a reason to suggest that Michael Gove will be the next prime minister. I'm certain he will. I put my mortgage on it. Okay. And then we've got Jeremy Hunt, who probably doesn't stand a chance, but he will definitely run when the time comes because he hates Boris with a vengeance. So this would be his way of, I suppose, bouncing back. But he can't win because he's regarded as too wet by most of the Conservative Party, even though he does have a good record on health, or at least he's got a background in health, and that would be good at this Omicron moment. I think poor old Sajid Javid would run. I don't think he'd stand a chance, but I think that this man is ever hopeful.
But he has the best power stance.
Yeah.
That's hot. That's the only metric by which we should judge our leaders. Is like, how good is their power stance, you know?
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Very good. But he doesn't have a chance because he hates Gove and he hates Dominic Cummings. So he resigned. If you recall, he resigned because of Dominic Cummings. He refused a demand from Johnson and Cummings that he dismissed his advisors. That's why he resigned. So he's the kind of comeback boy, but he doesn't stand a chance. But I think he'll run. Those Dominic Raab, you know what? I don't think so. I don't think people like or recognize Dominic Raab. They think he's slimy. I don't think he's got a very good PR persona, a press sort of media face. No. People don't like him. They see just a snotty schoolboy. So I don't think he might run. I doubt it. I mean, I don't think he stands a chance anyway. So my money's on Gove.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, my money would actually be on Priti Patel.
Okay.
Because the right just absolutely love her. Like they love it. I cannot explain why. I mean, well, I could totally explain why. It's the anti-immigrant thing that definitely helps. But that combined with, I don't know, she has this like smirk about her of sort of like, I'm better than you smirk that I don't know, seems to appeal to a lot of people because it makes a lot of other people angry and therefore they love do you know what I mean? I think they get off on the provocation or something, because I'm not gonna lie, I've definitely enjoyed like a trait in that of a politician I have liked, that they rile people I dislike up. Do you know what I mean? I've definitely felt that, and that is definitely the effect that she has. So I think she'll be in the running pretty heavily, but I'm not sure how popular she actually is with the party. Within like with the parliamentary, like was in the MPs basically. I'm not sure how popular she is with them, so I don't know how. I'm not sure how that would go.
But it'd be very interesting if she threw her hat into the ring. There'd be two women then. And well, let's see.
Yeah. I mean, they could totally play, you know, because can you imagine that Priti Patel is standing up there as like the first. They will hammer the Labour Party for it. They'll be like, oh, you're meant to be the party of like diversity and inclusion and all of these things and social justice, but yet why have you got a straight white man who's a member of the aristocracy, you know, Sir Kier Starmer, running against us with our third potentially female prime minister who is a daughter of immigrants, you know, like who's the racists now, you know? That's what they'll hammer if they get Priti Patel, or at least that's how I think they would try and sell it.
Well, maybe they should, frankly. I mean, you know, that's a very genuinely important point. Maybe Labour's, you know, diversity record is not as good as it should be, and the Labour Party needs to think about that. You know, let's talk home truths here. Labour does a lot of box ticking. I mean, I hope we can talk about Labour if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I think
let's go to that now. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, they do an awful lot of box ticking because they seem to be kind of focus group driven. They seem to be kind of so bureaucratized. They don't seem to be very, they're very wooden. They don't seem to be very sort of human anymore. Is that me, or do you get that?
No, I get that feeling as well. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just like in comparison to. There's like, because you're holding up Kier Starmer as compared to Jeremy Corbyn, who was obviously very, very popular with the members, especially for obvious reasons. I mean, he was a real human. And then also Kier Starmer compared to Boris Johnson on the other side of the aisle, you know. And this is something that I still struggle with, is like, Boris Johnson is really funny. He's really quite amusing. And it's terrifying that I still think that, even though I'm totally aware of all of these awful things that he is overseeing, right? I still find him funny sometimes. Do you know what do you know what I mean? Like,
I absolutely know what you mean. This is Kier Starmer's failure. This is his problem. He's dull. There's no doubt about it. You know, I mean, if you compare put them both on a stand, ask them both to deliver an after dinner speech, tell a joke, make the audience laugh, make them feel good about themselves, make them feel good about their country. I know who's going to win, hands down. You know, so Kier Starmer's failure in part is a kind of presentational failure, but also he just doesn't have it. And I still believe that. I always felt he was dull. I always felt we'd get to this stage where he'd struggle and just retain hold and hope. His whole strategy, Josh, it seems to me, has been based on the fall of the emperor, the idea that Boris Johnson will fail and he will step in. That's his strategy. To my mind, it's not a strategy.
No. It's the Joe Biden strategy. Like, this is literally what the Democrats did. They picked the person who was closest to a corpse, and they sat him in a basement. No, but that's what they did. And now look what's happened. Like, he's like the most. He's more hated than Trump was. Like, this is bonkers to me. Yeah. Like the. But it's because they picked him to be unoffensive and toe the line that he needed to toe, and not have any charismatic virtues or, you know, passion or, you know, any sort of political capital where people would think, well, that's a good speaker, you know. And the Labour Party are making all the same mistakes as the Democrats, and it's like,
no, it's a bit like Hollywood, right? When Hollywood, you know, you get all these independent filmmakers and these brilliant script writers who come up with these really innovative, spirited, different, original ideas, and they all funnel into Hollywood. And what comes out at the end is some kind of Spider-Man franchise, which they've made 15 times with huge stars that everyone knows. The reason is, there's a really good reason for that, is that that's safe money. If you produce something with a huge star that everyone knows and they know the storyline and it's just better special effects, you're going to get your investment back. You're not going to lose your money. Okay. It's exactly the same with politics. The reason they went for Joe Biden is he was a safe pair of hands and everyone recognized him. The reason, maybe you couldn't say the same of Kier Starmer because certainly no one recognized him, but he was certainly a safe pair of hands. The point is, that's not what we need. And that is not socialism. And it's certainly not what I understand the role of the Labour Party to be.
What would you consider the role of the Labour Party to be then?
Well, socialist. It's a socialist party for working people. It was created by trade unions for working people. It should be. Now, who's that? The woman who's just taken over Unite. What's her name? Graham.
Let's look this up.
I forget her name. Yeah, she's brilliant. She's just come in. She cut her money to Labour. I wouldn't say that's a fantastically
Sharon Graham.
Sharon Graham, right. I have a lot of time for Sharon Graham. Look at what she's doing. I'll tell you why. Because she basically stood up and said, I'm wasting my money on you lot. I'm here for a reason. And my reason is to improve the lives of working people through my trade union. Now, that actually, in a sentence, is the history of the Labour Party. That's what the Labour Party was created for. To my mind, it's what it should be doing now. But is Labour talking about working people? When was the last time you heard the Labour Party talking about working people? The gig economy, absolute exploitation, shitty housing, a crap NHS, which is starved of money because rich people just go to private health. You know, what else? Shit schools full of fucking drug traffickers. When was the last time you heard all this? You don't hear it because it's just not what the Labour right stands for. The Labour right stands for winning power for power's sake. They do not stand for improving the lives of working people. No matter how much they say they do, they're lying. It's not true. Okay. They're a kind of bureaucratic anomaly and they just want power. And it's not about Parliament. This is about trade unions, the movement, improving the lives of working people, you know, and in a sense, sometimes I feel to hell with Parliament. You know, the Parliamentary Labour Party is almost like a separate party. Does it represent working people? Which of those Labour MPs is actually working class, really, really working class? You know, a real working class person who has to rely on payday loans, you know, and has got a mother in a care home with dementia and can't afford to pay the bills, whose husband has left her because he's a shit lorry driver, you know, and he can't stand being poor anymore and he wants to have some fun in Germany. You know, how many people in the Labour Party actually reflect that reality of British society? Or, I mean, the Labour Parliamentary Party?
about, well, half a dozen maybe. Yeah, it's awful. It's really, really, really awful. And I like, so this is the question that I've actually been wondering about for a little while, and I'm kind of waiting because I see these things happening where you know, the Labour Party are betraying their base, arguably, and at the same measure, the Conservative Party are also like weirdly betraying their base. So the Labour Party, like, you've laid out why that is, but the Conservative Party are, or at least what I understood them to stand for, was like that sort of right wing free market neoliberalism, like freedom sort of, I don't know, quite a romanticized view of, maybe they all think they're classical liberals, but you know, there's that sort of, that faction of the party, and they seem to have just, and that part of the party was not really, is quite libertarian. They're very anti big government, and they're just being ignored at the minute, like completely ignored by the party. I mean, like, all of the moves that are being made now are like completely antithetical to that kind of belief. Do you know? And
definitely.
And so I like, where are the new fucking parties? Like, who do we vote for?
Okay, you know, this is a really important question, and I think you know, you did mention earlier about, does the left need a new party? Should the left form a new party? Now, I'm a complete hypocrite because I've actually wavered on this. At some stage, I think I've said, yeah, we need to bloody withdraw from a Labour Party, mainly because I hate the right of the Labour Party. I think they're just such a parasitic tumour, you know, that is bleeding us dry. But I've wavered, Josh, and I think I've changed my mind.
Okay.
I was a member of the Labour Party. I'm not a member now. I left the Labour Party because of Starmer. I'm sorry. I was a Corbynista. I make no apologies for that. But I'm sorry I left. But maybe I should rejoin. I don't know. But the point is, my answer to the question, does the left need a new party right now, is no. Now, that would seem a bit strange in the era of Starmer and the ascendant right. But the reason I say that is, just looking at the record, basically, it's kind of historical, I suppose. What is the Labour Party? Now, I did say earlier, it's actually a movement. It shouldn't be regarded just as a parliamentary party. The problem with the Labour movement is that the parliamentary party has occupied a disproportionately powerful position within it. And this is when Corbyn took over, he did change a lot of the rules of the Labour Party to try and reverse that. You know, and some of those rules have subsequently been reversed by Starmer. That doesn't mean we can't go back to them and change them again. Now, there have been, and I understand their frustration, splinter movements, obviously. There was, I don't know if you recall, in about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that, Ken Loach, the film director, but also he's a well-known activist, created a party. He created a party called Left Unity. He got so fed up with the Blairite, Brownite axis, he said, "Sod it, we're going to create a new party." And he did. It's called Left Unity. And what happened subsequently? They did get some members. People joined them as a party. But in the first general election, they came along, the 2017 general election. They didn't run any candidates. They said, vote for Labour. And then in the 2019 election, they didn't run any candidates. So there's no point forming a separate party if you're just going to recommend that they vote for the Labour Party. So that was a Labour. And then on the right, there have been failed experiments. The classic one was the SDP in the 1980s, probably a little bit before your time, forgive me, but that was a disaster. Shirley Williams, I saw something written about her recently. She's still sort of talked about. But basically, the SDP was a splinter group, Social Democrats who didn't like Michael Foot and the left of the Labour Party. at the time when the militant tendency had kind of infiltrated, and they split off and they subsequently evaporated. They disappeared into history. It's very, very hard to create a new party. There's lots of good organizational and procedural and financial reasons for that. It's very, very hard. The most recent one was this, I don't know if you recall, in 2019, following the big divisions over Corbyn, there was a splinter group called Change UK. Mm-hmm. Do you remember Chuka Umuna?
Yes, I do. Those bunch of absolute paid up shills that decided they were going to change politics.
Yeah. And what happened to them?
They got no votes.
Absolutely. They completely disappeared. And this is the lesson.
They're all a bunch of baucus, like opinionless, like just pictures that have no ideas and no passion and are only there because they were rich and time wealthy and party insiders. Yeah.
Yeah. And narcissistic. And they're a really good lesson about why we don't need a new party. But it can't be done. And you know what? It shouldn't be done. The job of the left is to win the arguments for change within the Labour movement. Okay? Within the Labour movement. Okay? Pure and simple. And this is not a glamorous job. It's a difficult job. And it's a slow job. It's a gradual job. And people get very frustrated. They want things right now, but you can't have anything right now, not in a democratic society. But you know what? Within the wider movement, trade unions, social movements, they're out there. They're doing really good work. And we should be praising them. The trade union movement, for example, the Trade Union Congress, is the most fantastic organization in this country. People are not aware of what they do. The level of solidarity that the TUC, for example, gives with oppressive regimes around the world. The trade unionists who are fighting in the forefront of the fight against brutal, violent dictatorships. But it's coming from our trade union. It makes me frankly proud. The TUC is brilliant. And that is where our future lies. And I am absolutely of the old Labour school, where the TUC should have a huge say in the role of the Labour Party. And it's no surprise, of course, but the right wing want to cut that back, to disenfranchise them, to gag them. But the Labour Party and the TUC, as far as I'm concerned, or the trade union movement, are synonymous. That's what the Labour Party was. It was their voice in Parliament. The sooner the MPs in Parliament get that, the better. But we have to fight for it. So, no, I don't believe anymore create a new party. I believe we should just work hard, brutally hard, in a very unglamorous way within the Labour movement to change it back to the way it should be, which is left, left, left.
That's interesting, because I am done with them. I think that we need new parties. I think we need many new parties. I think the old ones need to die, because because it's one party in my mind. The Tories and the Labour, the Tories and Labour are just melding into one neoliberal single party, in the same way that the Democrats and the Republicans in America are essentially one party. Like they all fight and posture, and then they all just okay the £750 billion like military fucking funding bills, and they all stand in posture, and then they do nothing. All the Democrats ran on Medicare for all, some sort of widespread universal healthcare in America, and when it came to the time that they had the majorities and they could do it, like, what did they do? Nothing.
Of course.
But
I guess my question to you would be, let's just have an alternative history. Let's assume that they hadn't destroyed Jeremy Corbyn in the way they had.
Well, I think he would have been Prime Minister.
Would you feel the same way?
Oh, that's a good question. Right, hang on. Let me put myself in that world. I think I probably would, because I would imagine that even if they won power, that the problem would be once Jeremy Corbyn got in, but he would have been constantly and repeatedly undermined by the right of the Labour Party. And whether we came to the conclusion after he had become Prime Minister, which would have been wonderful, but if we had come to that conclusion now when he lost because of the way that he was treated by his party or the press, or maybe just because the people of Britain, didn't think he was right for prime minister, but I'm not really sure that's true. But yeah, I think that eventually the fact that the party has become so corrupted by the parliamentary insiders and by the money that they sort of seem to be desperate for from donors instead of, doing what the membership wants. I think that both of those institutions need to clean house, or they need to die, and they're not going to clean house, and therefore they have to die. That's just my feelings.
I mean, if you talk to right wingers in the Labour Party, they say the problem with the Labour Party is the left. They can't win. You can never win an election with the left in power. And if you talk to left wingers in the Labour Party, they say the problem in the Labour Party is the right. They kind of constantly chip away and undermine the true socialist policies. Well, I know where I stand in that argument. So my response would be not how do we deal with the left, but how do we deal with the right? And Jeremy Corbyn had it correct. He got it right. The way to deal with them is to create mechanisms and structures within the Labour Party that ensures that the right wing and the parliamentary party are kept in its place. I think you can do this. You can do this with institutions and procedures. The thing is, you've got to get it right. And he clearly didn't get it right because they reversed a lot of it. So I kind of have some sympathy for your position. I guess we need to get to a position where that doesn't happen. I don't know. I have no answers. I don't know how that could ever happen. But I think the actual task in our current political process of creating a new party is literally so difficult as to be almost impossible.
I mean, so there's one guy here in the comments, actually, Matthew Forrest has asked. He also first says politics is Hollywood for ugly buggers, which, like, amazing. But he also asked, do you see a large number of independent MPs coming into the Commons due to the lack of faith growing in both of the traditional parties? Do you think you'll see independents being elected in this sort of next election, whenever that is, 2023 or before?
Gosh, I haven't even thought of that. No, I don't actually, to be honest. I mean, obviously people lack faith in both parties, and there's no. I think that's what he's alluding to, and yeah, and I'd agree with that. But that doesn't necessarily translate into them not voting for those parties, because the thing about a party isn't necessarily a set of ideas. It's a label. It's a kind of identity that people, when they come to vote, recognize. This kind of idea of political recognition is really fundamentally important in a democracy. You have to know these people. You have to know the party. People recognize Labour. They recognize Conservative. It's no coincidence that these processes tend to have two very recognizable ancient organizations. I think there's probably something in that. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but there is a huge premium in democratic politics, or quasi-democratic politics, as I would have it, in recognition, political recognition. So the trouble independents face, they have a huge task. They on the ground. First of all, they have to be recognised, and it's very, very difficult if you don't have that label, Conservative or Labour, on the ground. Secondly, you don't have any access to funds. Thirdly, you don't have any access to people who are going to do on the hustings, workers from central office who are going to come down and put leaflets through your doors. It's really, really, really difficult to be an independent and to actually win an election. So only under very, very special circumstances would I say that succeeds. And that's usually when an MP has been so discredited and so disgraced. We had the Martin Bell, if you remember, the guy in the white suit. But the point is, no, I don't foresee a lot of independents flocking into Parliament. Personally, I may be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but it would be quite a good thing. But even so, what kind of independents would they be? Some independents have crazy ideas. I mean, are we worried about what they think? Do we know what they stand for? Could these people be kind of, what would you call it? Wolves in sheep's clothing? I don't know.
Yes, we'll see. I mean, I just get the feeling that if we were to have, because we talked about first past the post there, so I feel like if we had PR, it would be that more parties would just sort of spring up through the sheer fact that people would feel credibly able to not throw their vote away. I think that's the main barrier to like because so if you look at say 2014 or 2015 even, sorry, and the parliamentary elections when UKIP, for example, what did they get, like 4 or 5 million votes? That would have translated into a whole bunch of seats. And to me, that would have been incredible for British politics to have a sudden new party, like undermining the Tories and proving that you don't need to be Labour or the Conservatives to win some votes and have a swing in Parliament. And for me, like the biggest obstacle is first past the post to a new party, really.
Well, I mean, I totally agree, but I mean, how likely is it that that's going to be changed? They did try, yes. If you remember, under the Lib Dems.
I have quizzed people from Make Votes Matter about this, because they're like, it's all good, we're going to get the Labour Party on board, and I'm like, really? They're not going to get on board? Like,
you know what, Josh? If you want to change this, and Make Votes Matter should actually abandon everything and put all of its money and all of its efforts into Stop Funding Hate. Stop Funding Hate is that group that, you know, challenges the Daily Mail. It challenges right-wing journalism. It challenges the advertisers who put money into right-wing journalism, right-wing newspapers. If you broaden that campaign to a broad campaign against the right-wing press, you'd be able to solve a lot of these problems. But all of the problems we're talking about derive from the fact that this country does not have a free media. It has a media that is heavily, heavily dominated by right-wingers, a right-wing press, an establishment press. And that's why good ideas that would be of benefit to ordinary people, like PR, for example, never even get off the ground. They don't even see the light of day.
Yeah. I would love an actual classically liberal press. That would be awesome. That would be the dream, really. But yeah, there we go, unfortunately. So, Gavin, for moving towards wrapping up here, what are do you have any predictions for 2022, perhaps, in politics? Like, do you think Boris will really go in, what did you say, March, St. Patrick's Day? Do you really see that as being the most likely option?
Yeah, I'm going to stick my neck out. I'm going to say Boris will be gone by March. I can't see him surviving. Not because he might be able to engineer a slight rebound over Christmas. Maybe he will. But I think the guy is systemically flawed. I think if he does engineer a rebound over Christmas, he'll only screw it up in January or February. And he is so corrupt and so dishonest that there are literally hundreds of skeletons in his cupboard.
I thought you were going to say children.
Well, word on the street is that may also be the case, but I'm not going to say anything about that. Listen,
he's like Robert Baratheon in Game of Thrones, you know.
He is. He's like Genghis Khan. He's got so many bloody children, but no one knows. Anyway, we better not go there. But the point is, I don't see how he can survive, because the question at the end of the day is, will he win them the next election? Now, if the Tory MPs, and I think we had the vote today, what do we have? We had a rebellion. 98 Conservative MPs voted against plans for mandatory COVID passes. That's a rebellion of 98. That's massive, okay? Now, 63 voted against mandatory vaccination, blah, blah, blah. The point is, that's actually, for a ruling party with a majority of 100, that's a massive majority sort of undermining earthquake of a rebellion. The point being is that if he's going to face rebellions like that from now on, he's finished. Boris is finished. That's my prediction for 2022. Whether we'll get anything better, I don't know. I think we'll get better governance, because I don't think anyone could be as bad as Boris. But it's not the kind of governance I want, because it'll still be right-wing, loony right-wing, you know, kind of Tory from the Shires sort of fascism. But sorry to use the word fascism. But the point is, what else? What, globally or just Britain? I can't see Britain. Anything else changing. I can't. Can you? What's your prediction?
Ooh, I don't know. I would predict that. I just have this sneaking feeling that they won't, like, that they'll posture about removing him, but they won't. Like, Theresa May was doing things that were far more unpopular with the majority of the Conservative Party surrounding Brexit. And she hung on for, I don't know how many years, was it? 3.5? 3.5 years? Yeah. And she wasn't like anywhere near as personally popular as Boris is. And I cannot see them removing him when he's like, and I know that he is a liar and a charlatan, but he still seems to be a more of an electoral asset than any of the other, any of the other possible candidates. That's just what I think. I just get the feeling that they may not remove him because of that. And I know that they're taking a hit at the minute in the polls, but it's, from what I can tell, that's not going directly Conservative to Labour. That's going Conservative to Reform, like the new brand of the Brexit Party.
Sure. So
that's where they're losing the votes to. And I would believe that they think very strongly that they could win those back with the correct messaging. So I don't yet. That's just my feeling, is that they wouldn't.
Well, I guess what we need to do is wait until Thursday, isn't it? Because that's when we've got the Shropshire by-election. And a lot depends on what happens there, because that's, a safe Tory seat. And if there is an upset there, I think that will basically answer the question, because you can't, but we don't know. I mean, obviously the Lib Dems are saying that the bookies are now putting money on a Lib Dem win. That's also actually a good sign, but we don't know. The Lib Dems are saying nothing's guaranteed. Of course, they would say that, wouldn't they? People are very, very unhappy. I think Tory voters are very unhappy. To be honest with you, if that happens, 2022 is a crucial year, because the election has to be in 2023. Effectively, it has to be in 2023. And you have to have a leading candidate, a party leader in place for at least a year before an election, because of recognition value. So let's say it's in August, September 2023. They need to have a new leader in place sort of by the middle of 2022, which means time is running out. Now, if they get hammered in this election, and maybe there's another one and there's more scandals, and maybe there's a little bit rebound or whatever, and then Labour starts unveiling some popular policies, they've got a problem on their hands.
That's a whole different question.
That's a whole different question. But the point is, they're going to have to make a decision. They're going to have to act. It's almost like they've got a window of opportunity. They can't leave it too long. Okay?
Get Boris done.
Yeah, roll of the dice time, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess we will see. But anyway, thanks everyone for listening. Gavin, thank you very much for joining me. It's been a really, really fun and fascinating conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, thanks everyone. We'll see you next time. Pre-order my book as usual. And thank you.